Right, greetings. Thank you very much for coming back for the Q&A. I have to say I was thrilled listening to these two lectures, mainly because, as some of you know, Raffael and I teach a course here at Cambridge on animal rights law, and towards the end of the course, not only do we talk about what cases judges are considering, but we also talk about what laws exist or have been proposed. And I think it was 2 years ago, up until 2 years ago, my sort of slide said, well, yes, unfortunately there aren't any animal rights laws. And then 2 years ago I changed it and said, at the beginning I said, there are no animal rights laws. And then I put ... but wait. Just getting them excited. Anyway, so towards the end, obviously, I was able to talk about Panama and the city of Ojai. So it was great thing for the students to see all the philosophy, the jurisprudence, the antecedent welfare, basically the progress that's been made over 200 years actually coming to fruition in a city and a country. So it's very exciting for me to watch this, and both of your lectures are now going to be on my reading list for our students. So thank you very much. Lots of questions. I think I've got some. Raffael, I think, will pitch in, and then we'll open it up to you as well. I think, Leslie, I have to start with you. Although it's a question that relates to both of you. Huge amount of antecedent work, huge amount of preparation, dealing with the interest groups. You mentioned it, Gabriel. You mentioned it in terms of fishermen and tourism and so on. Question for both of you: looking back, I mean, if you want to tell us a little bit more about it, but your view is: did it influence the law, or was it helping people accept the law? Do you want to start, Leslie?
Yeah. For the most part, it was helping people to accept the law and to understand. So it was an educational process more than it was anything. It was trying to set a foundation of a different understanding, a different paradigm shift for the people, for our constituents, and feeling that they were ready to hear that. They were close, but they needed help just one step further. Quite honestly, the law was going to go through. Like I said, it's 3 votes of the council. So you have your 3 votes, the law's going through. That's my perspective. But I really I had a larger idea. I'm an educator by trade. So I wanted to educate. I wanted to move the community forward because we were representing that this was the community's values. So I needed to make sure that the community actually understood that we were putting this forward as their values, and they understood that. So for me, it was more educational and tapping into what the features of each group would be most likely to understand and be able to take that step forward. That was that was the educational process for me.
Right.
It's like, if I were a spiritual seeker, how would this best convince me? So I took the position of trying to figure out what would be best for my audience to understand.
May I ask, and before I come to Gabriel, I mean, you talked to the different groups and the groups that you particularly targeted and those you targeted less willingly. Did you get I'm never quite sure what the word means, but did you get a sort of pushback that this was just woke nonsense?
I did not, because we live in Ojai is, we are woke writ large. So everyone was like, okay, let's move that forward. Let's be woker. So no, I didn't get that pushback at all. Woke is not a pejorative in Ojai. You're behind the curve if you're woke.
I'm going to come back to a later question where I'll bring you back around to that. Gabriel, in your case, again, you talked of quite a number of groups of the population, and obviously, unlike Leslie, who only needs to influence 2 of her colleagues, you obviously had a a lot more people to bring with you, and also in terms of, as I say, the sectors, fishing, people making artifacts, tourism, and so on. So again, to ask you the same question, how do you feel about what you did? Do you think it was about right? Do you think it was, I mean, were you concerned that you were addressing groups who would otherwise, in principle, object to what you were doing? Do you think you were trying to win them over?
First of all, thank you very much. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm sorry that I missed the opportunity of being there with you. I would have loved to be there, but unfortunately, because of work commitments, I had to stay here in Panama. Hopefully, we have a time to meet sometime in the future. So, first of all, I think it's important to remember, at least in the Panamanian context, and I'm probably sure that in many other countries, our crude reality in the political level, and that is that number one, politicians respond to audiences, they respond to people, they respond to pressure. So, and second is that I've seen many Congress or parliaments where, yes, you have 70 members or 100 members or 200 members, but in reality, in the day to day, there's a small percentage of 10%, 15%, maybe 20% that are the ones that are really paying attention to things and are really the ones that are following up on what's going on and are the ones that you have to convince to get things to advance. So, in Panama, we have 71 members of Congress. I didn't have to talk to all of them. I had to talk to a specific group that are the leaders, but also I had to talk to the ones that felt pressure from their constituencies, particularly those congressmen and congresswomen that are from the coast areas, because they did receive some pressure, particularly from the fishermen. The fishermen in Panama are organized groups. When I think about the fishermen, when I think about the artisans, they are organized groups that go to parliament, that participate in the debates, that they knock on members of Congress doors and they tell them, hey, this is a bad idea or this is a good idea. So the moment the fishermen and the artisans raised their hands and said to some members of Congress, of their constituents, hey, wait a second, this could affect our livelihood, that's where I started to get a little bit concerned, because I know how well organized they are. Like in the United States, for example, you probably heard about the truck drivers. They're a very organized group. In Panama, the fishermen are the same. However, what we did, and they're also very loud, and they're also sometimes very aggressive and very, very strong in their presence. So what we did is that once we saw that they were pressuring and they were raising their hands and talking to some congressmen, what we decided is to, first of all, meet with them straight on, talk to them, address their concerns, recognize that they had a valid point, but try to see how to, instead of shutting them down or telling them nothing is going to happen, transform their concerns into ideas, into projects, into proposals that this bill and also the Ministry of Economy and the Ministry of Environment, the challenges and the concerns that they had will become opportunities. So that's when every concern that they had, we tried to address it with a policy. If they were concerned about their future, we told them we were gonna, and the law included elements of education, of capabilities, of training, of other opportunities. So I think what was key was number one, addressing head on their concerns and transforming those concerns into opportunities. But second, which was very important that I mentioned in my talk, was giving them a seat and a voice in the committee that was going to follow the implementation of this law. The moment that they realized that they're going to have a representative sitting in a board where they're going to discuss the implementation of the law, and they were going to have the opportunity to address their concerns with with this committee that's going to have representation of the different government agencies, they felt that they weren't just not going to be forgotten, that they're going to have a space to address whatever concerns may come up with the implementation of the law. And that helped them feel a little bit more at ease and accept the bill as a good thing. But in conclusion, there was opposition. We had to work that opposition for about a year with different meetings and the subcommittee. But at the end of the day, I think there was more acceptance and support at the beginning than opposition. I would say maybe 30% to 40% opposition at the beginning, to 60, 70% people favoring and supporting the bill. And that was the other good thing. And just to close with that, we had so many nonprofit organizations that support animal protection, sea turtle protection, from the local level, from the international level. People from National Geographic came to Panama to support the bill. And as I mentioned, congressmen and members of parliament respond to pressure. And when they see these 14 sea turtle protection organizations in Congress, and then they see, well, there's one fisherman organization and one artisan organization, but yeah, you have 14 organizations from sea turtle protection. They obviously felt that there was interest in both sides. If we didn't have the support of the academics and we didn't have the support from the nonprofits and just the pressure from the artisans groups, I think this wouldn't have advanced at all. So it was important to have both sides of the interest groups present in the debates.
Can I just ask a very quick question, and I'll invite Raffael. Did you prepare these groups? Because I think you said this had been going for some years. Do you think these groups, particularly the fishermen, were prepared for what was coming?
I think they were prepared at a technical level, for sure, because in reality, the idea came from them. I'm obviously a big supporter of environmental reform, environmental rights, and so forth, but I wouldn't say that was my priority number one in Congress. I was focused more on anti-corruption and transparency initiatives. I'm a lawyer, I studied public policy, and that's where I've been focused my career. So they were the ones that brought the technical expertise. They were the ones that explained to me for the first time the concept of giving rights to animals. They were the ones that approached my office and provided me with the general idea. Obviously, we did the studies and did the drafting and did the lobbying and being the political part, but they were super clear and they were incredibly important allies for the technical support. In fact, in several of the committees and several of the subcommittees and meetings, I didn't have answers to some of those questions. I really didn't know at a technical level some of the questions they were asking, of the fishermen would ask or other members of Congress would ask. And it was very important for me to have them on my side and defer those questions to them. So on a technical level, definitely they were prepared. At a political level, they weren't prepared. And that was my part. That's where I, as a politician, had to go in. So explaining them how to navigate Congress, explaining them what things mean in Congress, if a congressman says this or says that, or doesn't show up or show up late, all of these little signs and things that might happen at the political level, trying to explain to them and guide them to the process that for them obviously was, they were super excited that this bill was presented, and that for them meant an amazing whole thing. But also, this wasn't as fast as the private sector, where you need to get something done, you get that something done in a month. Here it took 2 to 3 years. So it was a little bit exhausting for them as well, having to go to committees and subcommittees and committees. But I was in charge of mostly that political part, and I think they felt excited every time they went to Congress, even if they had to come every week for so long. They felt that they were doing something important, and they were very excited about it.
Thank you.
Could I just want to step in and say what's occurring to me is that we have, myself and Mr. Silva, we have very different models. So you can be as successful on a very local level, and there is a process that is for a national level, and likewise for a state level or a county level. So you can think small, and you can do big work in a small space. And it's much less complicated. There's much more direct way to approach and get success. And I just kind of wanted to point that out because the complexity of working on a national level, obviously, it's so much more complex than what I did working on a local level. But anyone can work on the level that I worked on. And that's something I think is really important as a takeaway, is that you can do it. You just have to decide to do it. And one person can shepherd, whereas here it is a large, complex group of many groups that need to come together.
It's fascinating to hear you talk about the way you've met the opposition, right? And Gabriel in particular, you talked about at length about how you provided them with alternatives, right? So you've been making these necklaces using turtle shells. Here's another way of doing it using wood, for instance, right? So you're meeting them where they are. To the extent that you've both met opposition and Leslie, you've sort of anticipated it, I suppose, by you said I really only needed the 3 votes anyway, but I knew I wanted to talk to those communities to prevent any, I guess, opposition from arising or to, again, sort of responding to their concerns. To the extent that you've both met opposition, do you think it has been because you've framed it as a rights thing rather than a welfare improvement? You've both been clear about this, which I really like that. This was about recognizing animals, elephants or turtles as holders of rights, as subjects of rights, no longer just mere resources. Do you think that's what made people worried, or would you have met similar resistance had you framed it in a different way without using the term rights?
Well, the only people that really had issue with that were the lawyers, honestly. The people understood completely what we were talking about. And so I know we're a group of lawyers, I'm sorry. But honestly, conceptually, they didn't have Western jurisprudence as an obstacle in their thinking. They had connection to place and people and animals. So it was much easier actually to get that step to rights. They understood that. We're seeing our protections in the United States fall one by one by one by one. The EPA is probably going to be gone. Those protections, they understood the idea of protections not being able to protect, truly. So that was easier. And, I said that 2 years ago, right? That protections are dependent upon someone wanting to enforce them, and you have no control over the enforcement of that. You can go ask, but ultimately it's a governmental agency who decides to enforce or not. With rights, I can file suit. And that's a power that people understood.
That's interesting. Was that similar for you, Gabriel?
For us, it was very clear since the beginning that we wanted to do a rights-based approach rather than a welfare law. A welfare law regulates how humans use or treat animals, but they still assume that animals are a resource under human control. And for example, in this case in particular of sea turtles, welfare law might ban the hunting of turtles during nesting season or set limits on the bycatch. But the underlying idea is still that the turtles are objects of management for human purposes. On the other side, a rights-based approach that we did establishes that there's an intrinsic value with the turtles. It's not about whether humans can use them responsibly. It's about the turtles having themselves enforceable claims. And this is obviously a philosophical approach, a transition, but it's also very practical, as it was mentioned. Under a welfare law, if a hotel builds on a nesting beach, only the government can decide whether to intervene, and often depends on the enforcement, on the political will. But under a rights-based approach, any citizen or any community, any nonprofit can go to court on behalf of the turtles, and the standard of review is higher. And the question becomes not, did the developer follow the rules of the hotel, but does this action violate the turtles' rights? And that's very empowering for the nonprofits. So the nonprofits were very clear on this principle. As mentioned, before this project, I wasn't really aware or well studied on or well versed on this approach. So they actually brought this idea to me, and this is a very impactful and powerful idea which shifts outcomes profoundly. However, I do have to agree that this was perhaps a concern for the lawyers that couldn't really understand this at the beginning, because it's a profound shift on a legal entity scale. But the communities, some of them weren't really, the nonprofits knew about this, and that's why they were supporting the law, but the fishermen and the artisans, they weren't focusing on that. They were more focused on the dispositions in the law that says that sea turtle was capturing was criminalized. There were fines, that it wasn't going to be allowed. They were more concerned on those articles rather than the articles that were granting or protecting and giving rights to the sea turtle. So it wasn't really it wasn't really an issue. It wasn't really a cause of concern for the opposition groups, and it wasn't really a cause of concern for members of parliament as either. It was concern for some of the lawyers, but eventually the pressure, once again going back to that, of the nonprofits and the way they were prepared and went to Congress and helped address these concerns was profound and was very important.
That's very interesting. Something that's come up in both responses actually is the question of standing for human representatives, to bring an action on behalf of animals. And we talked about this in the introduction, where, according to most people, standing is a key feature of what makes a fundamental right or a thick right. But do I understand correctly that actually neither the Ojai Ordinance and the Panama Turtles Law contains a provision on standing? I think, Gabriel, you mentioned that the Rights of Nature Act that you talked about, that one has a provision on standing. Is it Article 5, I believe? First of all, I guess, do I understand correctly that actually neither of the two laws we're talking about talk explicitly about standing for animals or their representatives? And if that's correct, is there a reason why that hasn't been included? Gabriel, do you want to start?
In the sea turtle protection law, and there is a disposition that an article, I think it's Article 29. I don't have it, the document here. I have to open it on my PC. But I think it's Article 9 that it establishes that there are rights for the sea turtle right protection, and also rights that give them a right to live, to migrate. They're very broad in a general sense, but it is included. And then there's obviously the nature rights law, which is more, it's a broader law, and it provides not for a specific species, but for the ecosystem as a whole. And I do think that, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. So both of them included, but there's an important difference then, because I see them as complementary, not as distinct frameworks. Animal rights generally focus on welfare and dignity of individual animals, as we have discussed. And what we wanted to do is that sea turtles had their own specific rights, but at the same time, the nature law protection is broader, and it's not that all of the animals have to have their own specific law or specific rights. We considered this and evaluated this, and obviously, since sea turtles are an endangered species in the world and in Panama, we believed it was appropriate to also include that disposition that grants rights to sea turtles. But on the other side, you have to consider the entire ecosystem. You have to consider the air, the water, nature as a whole, and that's why it was important to have both. They are complementary laws.
Yeah, so in both our Elephants' Rights Ordinance and in the Rights of Nature Ordinance, aggrieved parties have legal standings, and aggrieved parties are people. So they can bring actions, and we deliberately set up a guardian system. There's a guardian system as well, but both have aggrieved parties have standing in our laws. So if you feel yourself to be an aggrieved party, you can file suit.
And do you see any sort of, I mean, there is sort of similar standing case law in the US that will just say, well, even if humans feel strongly about an elephant being mistreated, they're not actually aggrieved parties unless they can show some actual sort of personal interest. So is this a new concept, basically, that will allow anyone to bring a suit on behalf of an elephant?
Yes.
Or how exactly do we have to
Well,
understand this?
we have not, yes. So it is, anyone can bring suit on an elephant. It has not been tried in court, so we will see. But there are precedent in the states for it, guardianship for dogs who are left trusts and things like that. So standing as an aggrieved or representative party does have precedent with animals, and I would assume that would be the argument. One of the great things about being small is that you don't have commercial entities coming after you because it is infringing upon their potential income. So we will see how it goes, but it was written into the law and there's precedent, and if it were to come up, we take it to court and we'll see how it goes.
Yes, just to complement there, it is Article 29 of the Sea Turtle Protection Law, which establishes and grants rights to the sea turtles for free passage, healthy environment, and other complementary impacts. So it is included in the Sea Turtle Protection Law. And as mentioned, we don't need to pass, and this is my opinion, we don't need to pass a separate law that grants rights to every animal. The idea is not to create a fragmented legislation species by species. That would be obviously, in my opinion, inefficient and impractical. Instead, there are two complementary approaches. On one hand, you have the broad framework of nature rights law that I also talked about in my presentation, that already recognizes all living beings and ecosystems as right holders, which provides a baseline of protection for every species. On the other hand, you have a specific species law, in this case the Sea Turtle Protection Law, that can still play a role when a particular species is endangered. This was obviously the case of Sea Turtle Protection Law. So I think that, once again, both laws complement each other, even though both of them grant rights. One is to nature as a whole, the other one's for a specific endangered species.
Yeah, one thing I just wanted to add, when I talked about the environmental protection through CEQA, so if elephants are in the law considered to be a natural resource, an aggrieved party could, to me, claim that as a natural resource, it is a broad claim, and that I could be an aggrieved party if you are adversely affecting a natural resource. So that's one of the arguments that I would make that I didn't really, like I said, understand when that CEQA sort of was put in, when the CEQA qualification was put in. I didn't quite understand that, but in thinking about it, and I don't know that it was done deliberately, but all of a sudden I see, some power in that, and that's how I would argue it.
Yes, makes sense.
Very interesting. I mean, obviously, because the whole standing point that Raffael raised is we've seen so many cases not get to the door. They knock on the door and someone pops their head out and goes, "You haven't got standing," and shuts the door again. I mean, that's basically what's happened so many times. So it's interesting about Ojai. Coming back to Panama, I mean, you mentioned about the hotel that wants to build a hotel on a beach where the turtles are laying eggs, and you were saying, well, if the government doesn't do anything about it, it won't be stopped. Just for me to be clear, just to sort of wrap this one up, are you saying that if a hotel tried to expand onto a beach where there were sea turtles laid eggs, which would harm the breeding process in some way, and the government, for whatever reason, decided not to do anything, or because it favored the benefits of a bigger hotel, who else could bring an action on behalf of the sea turtles on the basis their rights of reproduction were being breached? Who could bring that action?
So, yes, as for example, in that case, anyone can bring it. The Minister of Environment can bring a lawsuit on behalf of the turtles. Nonprofit can bring a lawsuit in behalf of the turtles, the communities, and even a singular person. Just anyone that drafts a lawsuit, presents it with a lawyer in court, can bring forward a case. So it's really open to any human being that is in Panama and that follows the legal procedures. What we discussed during and consider in Panamanian context, what we will most likely see is that nonprofits that are on the day-to-day working on this are most likely the ones that are going to be pushing these cases in court. But anyone can do it, and I think that's the beauty of it, you know. And that on one side, and I take this opportunity and this question also to mention. I think I already mentioned it in my presentation, but um, even though we still don't have a case where somebody has practiced this and bring the lawsuit in favor in voice and representation of the sea turtles, we do have, or nature, we do have a very, very important case where the court has already made a decision based on our nature rights protection law. We had a huge mining contract here in Panama, mining project, which that had more than 30 years, a copper mine, open copper mine, which was creating huge environmental impacts in the country. We are a very small country. We are not a mining country like Chile, you know, it's massive country. Panama is very small in the middle of America's tropical rainforest, and we had a huge mining project. And a group of nonprofits brought a lawsuit to the court, and in their arguments of why this mining project was unconstitutional and was illegal, they did include the nature's rights law among other legal dispositions and articles of the Constitution. And the court, when they decided, they responded by saying that yes, nature had its rights and recognized them in their decision, and was one of the arguments the court used to strike down the mining contract. So even though it wasn't a lawsuit or a case presented on behalf of nature, it was included as one of the arguments, and the court responded and recognized this and struck. I'm talking about a multi-million-dollar mining project for $500 million each year in expenses. So it's not a small thing, it's a huge deal. And I think we were all very proud seeing that the law was a fundamental part of the court's decision.
Okay. I think we need to open up in a moment.
Yes, before opening up, I'd just like to pick up that one point because it ties in with a presentation that we heard yesterday. So on the theme of rights of nature and animal rights. So Carolina spoke yesterday about some of the ways the two can come into tension with one another too, right? So we talked about how they're sort of complementary with one another, but they can also come into tension because obviously rights of nature is focused more on the collective, whereas animal rights is more focused on the individual. So how do you see that? Because rights of nature and animal rights, you've both basically, shepherded laws for rights of animals, rights of nature. Have you thought about these conflicts? Have they sort of popped up at all in your context? And what do you make of that potential conflict there between the two, thinking perhaps of so-called invasive species, and what do you do with an invasive species that's an individual animal with perhaps rights, but then also it's maybe doing damage to the ecosystem. So what do we do with that issue? Leslie, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, so these are first evers. And so for me, solutions emerge. We have massive amounts of invasive flora and fauna, and they do come in conflict and cause tension with each other. And, I think at this point, each individual case has to be looked at as an individual case or a group of cases, a class of cases, and then you figure out, the solution emerges, the legal solution emerges. There is no law to go back to. There are only people who are willing to think seriously about this and come up with a solution. And that's what my approach would be, the emerging theory that you're going to have to figure it out.
Yes, I mean, as mentioned before, for me, I mean, there could be a potential tension between animal rights and the rights of nature, though I see it both concepts more as a complement or a productive tension, if I may, because they operate at different levels. You know, animal rights focus on the individual. They are rooted in the recognition of that in animals' suffering, pain, and the experience of that animal's well-being. For example, in this case, the sea turtles focus on that particular species, but the rights of nature, by contrast, is a focus on the collective. They protect the ecosystem, all of the species, the nature cycles. So there could be some tension where protecting the ecosystem as a whole may conflict with the welfare of some individual animals. However, in practice, I think that these frameworks often just reinforce each other by securing clean habitats, migration routes, freedom from human exploitation, rights of nature law, I mean, directly improve the welfare of individual animals as well. So I think they complement each other, and they're different tools but have the same purpose in essence. Animal rights zoom in to protect individuals, rights of nature zoom out to protect the systems, and one has to collaborate with the other. So yeah, I see them more as a complement.
Thank you. I've got one question for each of you. They're slightly different, although the underlying is the same. So Gabriel, what you've done here, both you and Leslie and Ojai, are firsts. You said this a moment ago. Now, it's great being first, but in something like animal rights law, we need second and thirds and fourths and so on. So my question to you is, from a brand point of view, is Panama, I'm sorry if I've already missed this, is Panama using what you've done with sea turtles, the law you've done, and the underlying story that it's delivering, which is, yeah, Panama is about people, it's about rainforests, it's about animals, it's about nature, and it's about sea turtles because we're granting them rights similar to humans. We regard them as essentially as important as people. Are you using this as a brand? And I ask not for marketing reasons, but in the sense of other countries saying, yeah, we're going to do that. We're going to use what we're doing, you know, to encourage people to look at us differently, come and visit us, and so on.
So that's a good question. I would say not as much as it could. You know, I think the potential here is amazing for tourism, for diplomacy, for national pride. You know, Panama is a country that, as many countries in the region, tourism is a very important part of our GDP, and a lot of ecotourism happens in Panama. And I think in that sense, that niche, yes, it has been a little bit communicated of the importance of nature in Panama as a whole. But the sea turtle protection law, particularly, I haven't seen much of marketing or communication about it. More about the nature rights protection. That one I've seen a little bit more. So that on the international scale. At a local level, since there are a lot of educational campaigns happening because of the law establishes that there has to be educational campaigns, we have to create a culture of understanding of the importance of the sea turtles. I have seen in media often, at least once every 3 weeks or 2 weeks, some important short documentary or news coverage about something that is happening with either the sea turtle protection law or something related to nature rights law. So I think that is important. It happens in the news, in prime time. They go to the beach and they do some filming, and they have the environmental minister talking about it. So, and they're going to schools to teach the students. and they're going to the local communities and talking with the local, the ground people. So there is a conscious effort from the Ministry of Environment and from the nonprofits to educate on this subject. Obviously, this takes time. There's constraints about budget, and there's many other environmental things that have to be taken care of. So it is an important thing, but obviously they have a lot of priorities, but they are little by little creating that awareness, and I'm happy that they're doing that. It's not always the case. Sometimes you approve important laws, whether it be environmental or other topics, and they are not implemented at all. You know, lawmakers, they create the laws, but they don't implement it. However, in this case, I'm very happy to see that it is being enforced, it is being implemented, not at 100%, but I think that is perhaps normal in Panamanian context and in many democracies. And that on one side. On the other side, it's been very surprising, you know, because even though if I haven't seen maybe the government projecting this at an international sphere, more focused on education, I have seen an enormous, it was surprising for me, enormous attention at an international level from different newspapers, media coverage, and even celebrities. I mean, I think I mentioned this in my presentation, but the day Leonardo DiCaprio posted an Instagram picture about the sea turtle protection law that we had in Panama, I was like, what's going on? Like, whoa, this has become a very big international thing. The day National Geographic also made a coverage about the sea turtle protection law. It was like, whoa, that's impressive. And it's kind of weird, you know, because you think, well, the government of Panama should be behind this and should be talking about this more on an international level. But, you know, sometimes that happens. Sometimes we are our own critic, our own internal obstacles. But it's been very important seeing that even though without laser focused government effort to create an international strategy surrounding this, it has become organically known in many media outlets.
Okay, that's good to know. And Lizzie, a similar question for you.
Yeah.
Are other towns looking at Ojai and going, I want one of those?
Yes, we get calls all the time.
Good.
And, you know, we're very small, so we can take those calls. I mean, they come into the receptionist who says, well, you want to talk to Leslie. Here's her phone number. Like, okay. So, yeah, and what we're really finding is that true to form, the right to bodily liberty for animals is the least of the ones we get called about. We get rights of nature calls. Often we get calls that are very general, like we need to move forward with some sort of animal rights ordinances, and so we will talk about the glue ban, or we will talk about the breeding ban. And those are the ones that are the easiest for folks to understand, but the most calls we get is about the rights of nature, which is the hardest because it's a system and it's not bound by jurisdictions, and it's very, very complicated. But if you want to get started, have a ban on glue traps. It's pretty darn easy. So you know, and we get calls from towns all over California, right. Honestly. And, you know, once again, it was the media, it was the nonprofits, the Non-Human Rights Project, and PETA, and these organizations that put people in touch with us about legislation. So
you started the pebble rolling down the hill.
Yeah, and I have not yet done this, but it is on my to-do list and has been for a year and a half, which is, you know, as a council member, I'm afforded some sort of, you know, distinction, very minor, of course, but I can go make public comment at other towns, and they know Ojai, and they're going to listen to a council member, you know, just professional courtesy, if for no other reason. So to go make public comment for 3 minutes, it's the beginning of the agenda. You know, you can make public comment and leave, right? And so I think that is the plan with the Non-Human Rights Project, is I start with a radius around my town, you know, and start there with getting small little towns, and then it becomes, bigger and more powerful.
It would be fascinating for us to teach in a year or two and go, and here's a list of cities and towns in
Right.
California which have passed these laws.
Right, exactly.
That's how these things may work.
That's how, I think in my particular context, once again, at a local level, that is how these things work, which is very powerful, and it's very actually fun, right? It's fun to go to these small little towns and tell what you're doing and suggest that they do the same.
Absolutely.